Last year, coming into the Season 6 World Championship for League of Legends, the Korean organisation, the ROX Tigers, were fielding the lineup which was actually the favourite to win Worlds because their team had won LCK Summer, SK Telecom, the perennial favourites, the perennial champions within Korea, hadn't actually even reached the final. And in the World Championship, ROX Tigers had gotten all the way through to the semi-finals where they were going to face SK Telecom. And it was very much thought at the time that this was kind of the real final. Whoever won this was very likely going to win the title and actually did go on to, because obviously SK Telecom did win that match and did go on to take the title, admittedly in 5 games against Samsung. Now, before the semi-finals, Jacob Wolf, the reporter for ESPN, published a report saying that according to sources close to the team, the lineup of ROX Tigers would disband after the World Championship. Now, this report was published on the 6th of October, and ROX Tigers made a tweet 10 days later on the 16th. They said, "We are aware of the Jacob Wolf article and confirm it is based on speculation. A statement will be released by the team later today." The next day, 17th of October, they released their official statement via a tweet longer, and they claimed that the ESPN article was absolutely false. They implied that due to the contracts ending on November 30th, which was later than this, as we're talking about 17th of October, due to the contracts ending, it's the same scenarios for any team where contracts are ending at the end of a year or 2 year span, and they could resign, they could go anywhere. No one could really know, and that they've made an equivalency between the scenario that Jacob Wolf was describing and any team, and as a result, they considered it speculation to suggest that the players were going to leave. They spat out kind of a sob story about the problems they'd had as an organisation getting sponsors over the years, and actually tried to suggest that the ESPN report put potential sponsorships that were about to line up, business deals, in jeopardy. That was their word, in jeopardy. They claimed that they had faith in their players and that the relationship between them it's something special. So it's really something special, as if almost to imply that the players are going to re-sign, or, maybe the whole team's come back. That was kind of the implication they're giving out there. They pointed out that there were no negotiations ongoing, but said that they did receive offers for the players, but they hadn't responded to them. They said that the ESPN piece established nothing newsworthy, their words, and was purely speculative, also their words. They claimed that our representatives, manager, and players are all surprised to hear of this supposed agreement to disband following Worlds. So let's go through their claims. So first of all, they claimed that ESPN's article was absolutely false. Now, how could they know that it's absolutely false? They can't actually. They cannot know that organizations out there haven't reached out to some of these players privately, knowing the contracts are going to end, and spoken to them, or spoken to them on a social level, or the players themselves haven't talked and already agreed it outside of the management. They can't know these things. They absolutely cannot know that it's absolutely false. How could they know this? What's crazy about it is when they say it's absolutely false, so none of it's correct, okay, the report. The most bizarre part of that is it almost implies that ROX Tigers themselves don't actually understand what the report said or what the report itself implied from Jacob Wolf. Because they say in their tweet longer that their contracts were ending, that the contracts are coming to a close. That's what Jacob Wolf said. They say that they received offers already. They say that there are no active negotiations ongoing. Now, Jacob Wolf had said, none of the Tigers players, this is in his report, has been able to open negotiations officially with teams abroad due to tampering rules that prohibit the activity while competing on the Tigers squad. Their contracts end on November 30th, according to the league-recognized contract database, after which they will be able to sign elsewhere. So nothing that they've said there actually contradicts what Jacob Wolf said, in as much as he actually said contracts haven't ended, therefore they haven't officially entered negotiations. So why are they even mentioning this part here? As though, if you read only their tweet longer, you'd get the impression that Jacob Wolf's report said the ROX Tigers have already begun negotiations and have already essentially signed with another team, and they'll definitely happen on this particular date. And they're like, no, none of that's going on. No one ever said that. Why are they bringing up other stuff here? Then you've got to add in that they claimed, our representatives, our manager, players are all surprised to hear of this supposed agreement to disband following Worlds. Worlds, first of all, we only have their word for that. We have no idea what those players actually thought. I'd love to know now when some of those players have left. Sadly, because of Korean culture, they probably wouldn't speak out about it regardless of the case. But it's absolutely meaningless in the context of people within the org. Because there are people within the organization who might say to their boss, brought into an office. Now, have any of you been telling people that you're going to sign with the team? Have any of you been talking to any teams? No, boss, certainly not. Guess what? People lie. I mean, this is a ridiculous scenario. I know so many cases in the history of esports where someone told their team one thing and their teammates one thing, and even sometimes friends of theirs one thing, but behind the scenes they were working another deal and they went with that in the end instead. And everyone's like, what happened here? How did this all go to... The idea that the organization knows at all times what's going on, especially with players, by the way, that are going to leave the organization. One thing you have to understand about Korean organizations is because they have this strict hierarchy in Korea, and when you join a team, to some degree, you kind of are owned by them. You're almost like their property. They pay you, and therefore you do whatever they say. That's your job. Well, as a result, it's actually considered quite bad manners, even when you know your contract's ending, to like look elsewhere within the scene. This actually happened to Flame in his scenario with Longju when he was already benched. He was never going to play again, and his contract was going to end. And they were somehow outraged at the idea that he was daring to go out there and actually look if there's other teams would fucking pick him up for the next year of League of Legends, as opposed to wait at the end until you're like the fat chick at the last call in a bar looking, is there anyone still available I can go home and fuck? Like, it's absolutely ridiculous. And so the problem is, since this Korean culture is like, you know, the head coaches are like your father figures and they've been telling you what to do the whole time, these players are scared to speak out against those people, scared to tell them, hey, I want to go somewhere else next year. I know you haven't actually given me your formal offer yet, and we haven't talked about negotiation, but actually, you know what, like I liked it in the team for the last couple of years, but I'm going elsewhere now. I'm going to leave, I'm going to go to China, I'm going to go to NA, whatever, I'm going to go get some money. They don't want to necessarily tell the adult figure that sort of a scenario. So the idea that somehow the ROX Tigers organization knows that none of their players were talking to anyone else, and none of them were already essentially in their mind decided, like, as soon as this Worlds is over, as soon as my contract ends, I'm going elsewhere already. That's absolutely a ludicrous premise that they think they can know that information. Also, it's totally meaningless when you understand how leaks come about in esports. So I'll give you some insight here, because there's so many fans over the years think very naively and almost on like a childlike level about how the industry works. So what they'll say is, like, a leak will come out that an organization is going to sign a massive high-profile player, and they'll say, well, it's your own fault. If you didn't want leaks to happen, why didn't you just keep things within the ranks of your organization? How could anyone do that? Because by very definition of making the signing of an outside person, you must make connections outside of your organization, communicate with that person. They are then going to communicate with people around them. You're going to communicate with people around you. And all it takes is one little link in this chain to come out and leak the information to journalists, and then the journalists find another link to confirm it, and bingo, there's his story right there. So on one level, yes, it could be the player himself who leaks it. It could be the organization. Quite unlikely though, right? But what if it's someone within the organization who doesn't care that the owner wants this all kept under wraps and he's willing to tell someone else, like a journalist directly? What if people within the organization or players in the organization tell other players, you know, their friends, the other people in their peer group, and then that person goes and gives the heads up, and then the journalist goes and hunts it down and finds someone disgruntled or otherwise who's willing to go on record? One of the most famous ways that leaks happen in esports is, again, these deals don't take place in a vacuum. You're not just one org contacting this player. Do you want to come and play for me? Yes, sir, I would. Two of you in a room alone. Well, as long as neither of us two say anything, it could never get out there to the real world. No. First and foremost, once the deal's even going in the process of going through, people are going to ask their friends for advice. They're going to ask lawyers. They're going to ask people at home, family members. Family members famously in sports have leaked a lot of stuff. But here's the more important one. Odds are it's not just you and that guy communicating. What about the other organizations communicating with that guy? And what about when they're talking to that guy, and maybe two or three organizations are getting quite deep in negotiations, and he's going to sign with Team A, Team B, or Team C, and he narrows it down. I'm going to go Team B or Team C, and Team B hears that Team C is in the running for it, and Team C hears that Team B is in the running for it through the grapevine. They also get information, essentially how leaks happen themselves through the scene. That's how they get inside information, so they can have a knowledge-based advantage when they're doing the negotiation. And when you know that B and C are there, and you see what negotiations are going on, you're getting a sense of, I can kind of tell what they must be offering and what we're offering, and can we up our offer? Let's say Team C loses out on the player, and he says, I'm sorry, like I'm going to go elsewhere. I'm going to go and sign with this other team instead. what often happens is Team C is salty that they didn't get the deal. They're upset. They're disgruntled. Oh, you should have come to us. We offered you X.X fucking K. I mean, obviously that wasn't literally a scenario. I mean, he in theory had or verbally agreed to that team. But in this scenario, Team C then sometimes goes to the journalist. The same org that themselves 6 months later might get really mad that a journalist dares break a leak about their player going somewhere. He'll then go somewhere. Hey, you know what? Here's the inside story on that. He's going to this team now. He's going to sign soon. They're going to kick out this guy instead. And also they're trying to bring in this Korean jungler to go with him. That happens. This is a key thing that happens. Along with friends, other pro players. There's a lot of pro players who don't give a fuck about journalism and their orgs. They'll happily just drop dime on all that's going on within their org or with the next team, or they've got links within an organization still. And the whole point is, as soon as the journalist gets the info, that's just telling him what to look for and where to look for it. Once he has the info, now it's just about confirming the info. As soon as he finds a couple of credible sources that he's willing to rest his reputation on, by the way, as outlined in my video about Jacob Wolf and the fact that you can trust the journalistic process because of the repercussions and the consequences if it fails and what that would do to your career. So you can actually trust this process has a logic and has an integrity built into it, because if it doesn't, actually that will come back to bite those people themselves in the future and will crush them ultimately and their credibility. And for investigative journalists, credibility, as you can see by their reaction when Reddit etc. call them liars, is everything. That's very, very important to them, and that is currently the currency that they trade off within their business. So interestingly enough, now that it's all gone down, I'll even point out this. When this story came out by Jacob Wolf, I myself, and I'm not someone who actually is in the world of investigative journalism very much. Like, I have friends that are and peers that are investigative journalists. Therefore, I hear things behind the scenes and I talk to people about the industry, but I'm not out there hunting down every little lead, trying to get every tidbit of information, going and double checking pieces of information. But just within the circles I move in, before this story had come out, I had already heard from a team who had talked to me and told me, I'm pretty sure we're going to have Smeb next season. Like, we've spoken to him, we're in position to potentially for this to happen. And other teams as well were like, oh, we're looking at thinking of this player. And I'd be like, he's really going to come up. He's going to leave ROX Tigers, one of the best in the world, and not go to China for loads of money. Oh, no, yeah, maybe he is. Also, again, China's already in process of looking at these players. And when these players are going from, let's face it, ROX Tigers, as they point out in their own statement, didn't have a whole lot of money in options, etc. You're on one of the best teams in the world, and now you've got an option to leave that. You're going to have to leave Korea, though. You're going to have to leave all the fans of ROX Tigers. I've been your fans for a couple of years. But you're going to go to China and potentially make millions. Well, now, maybe you won't just go ahead and tell everyone that before the fucking tournament finishes, before your contract ends, and they could potentially queer the deal and could go and fuck with your possibilities. I mean, I have business deals myself I make, right? Where the deal hasn't finished negotiating and someone else contacts me and they want to like sponsor me or work with me in a similar way. And they'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, can we work with you in this sense? And I have to tell them, well, you can certainly make an offer, but actually there's someone else like in a similar sector that's working to potentially do a similar deal with me. And they'll be like, oh, who is it? And I'll be like, well, I'm not going to tell you that. I mean, why would I give that away? Like, if I told you that, maybe you go and talk to them and mess the deal up with me somehow, or maybe just by knowing that information, you get some weird information you don't deserve if you're not going to bid as high up. So the whole thing's very complicated, and that's why whoever has the information in those sorts of deals, the dynamic favors them. And so they're not going to give away information in the same particular sense to the person they're doing the deal with potentially. So I myself had already heard about ROX Tigers being available, and in fact, heavily implied that some of them were already definitely going to leave. And this is before Worlds is finished. This is before even this report had come out. Now, they also said, ROX Tigers, that the ESPN piece is purely speculative. Now, that's nonsense. It is not. Assuming you trust the journalistic process and the idea that someone spoke to Jacob Wolf who was credible, and he then confirmed that with one or more other sources, and then who even knows, by the way, who the source will be? The source could even literally have been the player himself. That has happened before. I know that in the past, people who are mainstream, who are big name investigative journalists have had organizations deny things when actually the player in question in the story was the source himself. That's how crazy it gets with these organizations lying publicly. So in this, or just being misguided and then smearing someone's reputation when they themselves don't know what's up. They don't know what the fuck time it is. So the idea that the ESPN piece is purely speculative is nonsense. I mean, essentially what they're implying is Jacob Wolf just sat down one day and he thought, right, well, ROX Tigers contracts are ending, so I think I'll just go and make up a story, not even that one of the players is leaving, because if you pick just one player is leaving, and you don't have to say which one maybe, you know what, that's a story, that'll get you some clicks, and the odds of one player leaving, yeah, pretty good actually, right? Especially if you're as good a team as ROX, you know, one player might go to China. No, he's going to go, and he's going to make a story that implies the entire lineup is going to disband, leave the ROX Tigers organisation, every player, not a single one's going to be retained, and that's the plan overall after Worlds. Now, that's a pretty big risk if you're just making that up completely. And so he did all of this, and what's more, it came to pass. That's exactly what happened. And that was just an idea from his brain. He just thought that up, and it just so happened it came to pass. Absolutely nonsense. Because here's the thing. As I just pointed out, it happened on the 26th of November, so 4 days before the contracts technically ended. It was announced by ROX Tigers themselves that all of the starting players except Peanut were departing the organisation. And Peanut himself then later left. So for Season 7... ROX Tigers retained 0 starters. Peanut went to SK Telecom. Smeb went to KT. Kuro went to Africa Freaks. Prey and Gorilla went to Longju. Even the fucking sob mid laner, Cry, went to EDG in China. How convenient that the entire team disbanded, sort of like Jacob Wolf said, and claimed he had sources suggesting that they were going to. And by the way, he didn't say that it would definitely happen. He said that that was the plan. And in fact, he even points out that negotiations had not officially begun because they're not allowed to. So the players, by the way, could actually have just all changed their mind, especially because of how ROX Tigers reacted. Maybe ROX Tigers gets enough money that the players feel shamed and go, oh, yeah, we better resign. And maybe that could have happened. Wouldn't it change the fact that the journalistic process was justified, had its own merit, and was correct in terms of what happened there? That's what, at the time, that is what was happening within the scene, and that is what Jacob Wolf reported upon. So absolute nonsense to suggest that this was purely speculative. Certainly not the case whatsoever. Now, they said all that stuff, remember, about how it's something special, this relationship in the organisation, and, you know, there's no decisions of final yet really been made. Well, none of that really fucking mattered, did it? Not a single player that stayed in your org. Even Cry didn't stay in the org, a sob player, who in theory, you know, you think could come in the starting lineup now that all the other fucking players have left. Not only that, some of the players went to orgs that are much worse. Africa Freaks, this is how bad it is, right? So Kuro went to Africa Freaks. Africa Freaks is not in a better scenario than ROX Tigers in terms of success, way less success. Not only that, ROX Tigers actually signed the fucking Africa Freaks lineup, and Kuro goes the other way. So this just shows that it's very unlikely any of these players were staying, which almost makes it seem like they already knew this in advance and had a plan, and that maybe a source could have gotten a Jacob Wolf and given him that information. He could have run it down, checked it was correct, and then turned out to be magically, prophetically. Remember, in their premise, he just imagined this in his whole brain, and it turned out to all come true. How plausible is that? More likely, the scenario I described there unfolds piece by piece and logically has a consistent logic, a coherence to how it plays out, right? And one thing follows another, as it would. Now, they also claimed that in doing this report, he potentially damaged or put in jeopardy like business deals that ROX Tigers were doing and sponsorships that they might be getting. What the fuck are they talking about? What does that have to do with Jacob Wolf and his journalism? So every time he does journalism, he's supposed to say, oh, excuse me, guys, you aren't working on any deals, are you? That if I was to bring out this story could somehow damage. What does that have to do with him? That's your business, ROX Tigers. That's fuck all to do with Jacob Wolf. That shouldn't even be a consideration in his mind. Also, you don't like things that are speculative and lack actual proof, right? Okay, sure. Show us some proof that you're working on these deals then. I mean, you don't like speculation, right? You don't like things that can't actually absolutely be run down and could just be made up, right? How the fuck do we know this isn't made up? Because unlike Jacob Wolf, you aren't ever going to be held accountable. No one will ever be able to come, and there won't be any consequences from making up something about some deals here that you were going to go with and all the rest of it. This is actually a problem. Also, think about the premise here. Unfortunately, to understand this, and I'll get into this in a minute, you have to really understand the way the Korean esports industry works and Korean society as a wider whole. But let's just look at this from a Westerner's point of view, shall we? So, their premise that they're creating for this part, that Jacob Wolf publishes this report saying, you know, essentially all the good players are leaving this lineup, and therefore, ROX Tigers that's about to maybe do some really good business deals and get some big sponsors, that might queer the deal. It might make those sponsors go, oh, I've called for it actually. Maybe it's not the time to invest right now. I don't know what the team's going to look like next year. And that somehow is a bad thing. Now, stop a second. Stop thinking from ROX Tigers' perspective, because yes, it would be bad for them to not get more money and get a better deal, etc. We understand where their best interests lie. Let's look at the interests, though, of the investor who's about to invest or the sponsor who's going to sponsor them. So, presumably, they're telling the sponsor similar things to what they're saying publicly here. In fact, little tip for you, I would suggest part of this twit longer was essentially not to communicate with you or I, the general public, or Jacob Wolf and chastise him. It was actually sending a message to those investors like, oh yeah, there's something really special with us and our players, and you know what, when we have more sponsors, we'll probably re-sign these players, and it's all nonsense about them leaving. So come on, sign on the dotted line, mate. Yeah, we'll definitely have, you love Peanut, right? Yeah, that Smeb kid, yeah, and the Prey guy, yep, the cheeky one, yep, well, we'll have him as well, and you just go ahead and sign the dotted line. Okay, let's imagine that premise, okay, where the investor invests, and then this happens anyway, as Jacob Wolf reported. The players all leave. So the investor, in this world, was being conned by ROX Tigers. He didn't know that he's about to invest a load of money and a load of sponsorship. And actually, as the report suggests, a bunch of these players, nearly all of them, were almost certainly going to leave. Let's imagine, since Kuro went to Africa, maybe he's the one who could have stayed. By the way, probably the worst player in that lineup. So he would have stayed. Like, there's no team to be built around that. You're not going to get a team at the level of ROX Tigers was, potential world champions, just from Kuro then building out with what's left over. Because you're not going to get SK Telecom players. You're not going to get elite KT players. You're not going to get even the players you had, they're all gone. So in this sort of a world, you're going to have this guy invest a load of money thinking he might have the ROX Tigers lineup again representing him and his org, and it's going places with more resources, and you're not. So that's good for the investor. He should have that information. You're trying to control the information to benefit yourself in this deal. See, you can understand that premise yourself, can't you, ROX Tigers, when you're on one end of the deal, but you can't understand why the player wouldn't reveal it all to you and other people would leak information. You can't understand the premises of them acting in their best interests when it's not in your best interests, right? Apparently the whole world should act in ROX Tigers' best interests. Here's the crazy part as well. What does that say about ROX Tigers' business acumen? So part of the reason why the players were thinking of leaving, and by the way, as the report said, would have left last year after season 5 potentially, is because the organisation had not done well business-wise. Team-wise, in the game, it's fantastic. They were making LCK finals, they were going to the final worlds, they eventually won LCK the next year, but they'd never had top-level finances like SK Telecom, or nowhere near the Chinese orgs. Even some of the NA orgs, more money, more opportunity, better business deals, better stability for the future, better relationships established. They weren't in a position to be able to pay these players what they're worth in the economy of League of Legends, in the ecosystem of Korean League of Legends, or the wider world of where a guy like Peanut could go to NA and make big money, or China, etc. They weren't in that position. They were failing. The organizer, get this, okay. So when the team inside the game succeeds, okay, we can give some of that credit, a bit, we don't know how much exactly, to the coaching staff, to Nofe, etc. But how much can we give to the organization? Okay, sure, they provide the team house and they take the players there and they pay their salaries. But they could pay the same salary and have the same team house and transport the same players, but have the player be the Africa Freaks lineup like they have now, and they'll never win LCK, and they'll never win Worlds, and they'll never be at the level that ROX Tigers was at. So, if anything, the ROX Tigers orgs were the ones failing, and now they're blaming essentially compounded failures. They've had 2 years of one of the best lineups of all time, being unable to get big sponsorships. They're blaming that upon Jacob Wolf when the lineup's actually going to leave already, and that's known behind the scenes that at least some of the players are leaving. Now, what that also says, let's consider the premise that ROX Tigers want you to understand again. So ROX Tigers, oh no, we're trying our best at business, guys. Oh, I think we're going to get this deal. They're like that bloody fucking loser out of The Simpsons who's like Gil or whatever, who's always trying to do some shit business deal and I can't hold it together. So, I was so unlucky last time, but I'll definitely sign this one. So they're trying to get the sponsor, right? This is their premise. If they go to the sponsor, and the sponsor goes, what's all this I've heard about this news article on this Western website, that's a sports website, I think, that I don't personally follow because I'm Korean or Chinese. And then ROX Tigers goes, it's all lies, it's all lies. And then the investor goes, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to pull out, this deal isn't there. So the investor trusts ESPN, Jacob Wolf, and a news report over you. You have face-to-face contact with this investor. You've spoken to him. You've built a relationship. You've shown him what your team's all about, the values and all that guff that people sell people on nowadays in business. And you can't close that deal because a report's come out, which according to you, there's no substance to anyway, and it's all just false anyway. So they believe that report over you. Says it all, doesn't it? You're fucking garbage at doing business, man. That's no one's fault but you and whoever didn't bust up against the wall instead of inside your mom. Don't give a fuck, mate. So very convenient that, isn't it, that they trust ESPN over you. Now, I already made a video, I'll put it up there again, which was about Jacob Wolf and the reaction from the community. Because, I mean, it's absolute nonsense the way people act as though like there was no process there. And in big name investigative journalists are just making up stories and just rattling anything off. Like, oh, see if I can get some hits off this. And there's no repercussions. And apparently they're all liars and most of the stories are wrong. Obviously, that is literally, that's a ridiculous sci-fi world, alternate reality that has no bearing on our own. That befits like the concept of the feminist patriarchy or something. It's absolute lunacy. But here's the thing. What could ROX Tigers have actually done in this scenario? What were their options once Jacob Wolf published the report? Option number one, say nothing. Or the equivalent of that, the business equivalent is you publish a statement that says, no comment on this. Our players' contracts end on November 30th, at which point in time we will announce whether they remain within the organisation or they will announce themselves if they are leaving. There's step number one. That's quite a professional approach. I mean, if you really believe it's all nonsense anyway and you have relationships where you're doing business with these sponsors, you don't need to say anything publicly in that sense. Option number two, they could actually have communicated to Jacob Wolf and cooperated with him and heard he was looking around for the story, and he actually said he tried to contact them himself, and it sounds as though they didn't want to talk to him. And they could have cooperated with Jacob Wolf and said, okay, we know you've got this story, but we'd really rather it doesn't come out. Like, we haven't finished the tournament yet. We think this could affect our players. We think this could affect business deals that we've got going on. So we'd really appreciate it if you don't publish the story. Because you know what happens in that scenario? This is something that's happened in other cases within esports. The journalist might say, okay, I'm willing to not publish this story, or I'm willing to delay publishing this story. For example, let's do a deal. We'll delay it until your team goes out of Worlds, okay? Or until you've had a chance to finish this business deal. I'll delay it, but in exchange, you must give me something. So for example, I want an exclusive interview with one of the players during Worlds to do a feature on them. Or I want to do a feature about your organization, and you invite me over, and I'll come over and I'll look around the whole offices, I'll talk to you, find out the ethos and the principles behind how you built the business, where you think it's going. Again, exclusive content. Or how about this? When the announcement does happen that the team is going to disband, which I already know and I've got you banked to rights, I can publish this tomorrow. How about instead of me publishing it now, I'm the one who gets to break the official story that they're all leaving. And I get to do parting interviews with a couple of them. I get to do an interview with you about what you think about the fact the players are leaving, what this means, etc. And again, I gain something, but you gain that I don't publish the story. They could have done that. That would be another professional approach to take. Now, instead what they did was they came out, third option, they publicly tried to shame Jacob Wolf, to call him a liar, to suggest he just made the whole thing up, to suggest that it was all absolutely false. They even implied things he never actually said. They then were incredibly dirty and disingenuous by implying that he's to blame or should in some way be cognizant and thinking about behind the scenes business deals that they're trying to do. They're also quite scumbag in the way that they imply that like they should be able to do business deals with people on essentially selling them a false bill of goods, that they're going to have this team that they're not going to have actually, and that somehow that's just cool ethically to do that. And that in any way, the journalist is obliged to owe them something, that has to contact them, has to check with them as though something's not true, unless they tell him it's true and confirm it. I mean, imagine if the fucking world ran like that. Like every time you find out a story about a politician, you have to go to them and go, is it true? And if they go, no, you go, oh, shit, I guess I can't publish that then. Chuck it in the bin, even though I've got all those sources and all evidence and everything. Ah, shit. Imagine if the world ran like that. We'd have the most neutered press imaginable, right? By the way, going to get into that, like Korea in some sense. So there's this trend, and it's not just started with ROX Tigers, but they were a focal one because they made a big deal about this and really were quite rude publicly and disgraceful in the way they behaved to a known journalist within the scene and potentially damaged his credibility. So there has been this trend, and it's happened in League of Legends, where organizations smear and lie about journalists, saying that a move isn't happening and that's nonsense. And either the move was planned to happen at the time, as the source said, he never said it's definitely going to happen, he said they're in talks for it to happen, or it ends up happening anyway, and we're then expected to believe the premise that, oh, it's just a coincidence that the player just made that whole thing up. There was never any basis to it, but then it did happen as well. Like, absolutely ludicrous. So this trend has happened, but the thing is, there's never any repercussion on the organization. That's what I've noticed. They never really get punished. People in the public don't even really tend to remember it that much. So I'm going to say this right now. I've been thinking about this for the last year, because as I've been following some of the things that are happening with identity politics and the whole social justice warrior movement, which obviously absolute disgrace to Western society, one of the things they've done actually that's really cool is there's this website called deepfreeze.it. And for games journalism, it's essentially, it monitors like the ethics of journalists there. So if they write some bullshit story or they purposely like mischaracterize something and they write like nonsense stories, terrible stuff, then people can add them to this database and it'll say what they've done and what articles they published. So that if you see a story published by this game journalist, you can go and look up his name there and see in their database, Deep Freeze, what he's done and what he said in the past that might be suspect on some ethical level. So I actually want this to exist for esports journalism. I want there to be a list of organizations and players and figures who have publicly lied. It's been shown that they've lied later. They've smeared people. They've behaved in an ethically questionable manner. And you can go and you can put in the name of a team and you will see, wow, they said about this player, then 6 months later this player, and then they said this over here, and then they lied about this deal. And finally there'll be at least a lower level of accountability. You still won't be a whole lot of consequences, probably won't stop sponsors signing with them, but I want this to exist. And I'm now in a position where I can even contribute some of the funds to help set something like this up. So I'm going to get the ball moving to get something like this in place, because these people can do this, but there has to at least be someone who remembers, someone who can hold them accountable for it and say, later on when they lie, we can go and say, but remember, this organization lied 2 times in the past, and they said this player, and then at least we can offset some of the public hit to people's credibility when they attempt to smear you publicly. So let's ask ourselves this question. What is the obligation of the journalist to an organization he's reporting on? Okay, well, simple answer for that. It's one word: none. They have no obligation to that organization. It's up to them to report what they want to report. I guess that sentence, I'll rephrase that. It's up to them, the journalist, to report on stories which they've found real conclusions and got evidence for and backed up with sources. It's up to them to choose what they report on. They don't have to go to an organization and check or confirm anything. They do not have to do that. It was never billed as an official report. This is a source telling me this. It's never an official announcement that the player had left. That's why it's so stupid the way their twitlonger was phrased, their statement. Also, you need to know this. The way the Korean scene works is so alien to the West. There's a reason why within the Korean scene, you don't get the same kind of leaks getting out in the Korean scene or in the West, as in leaking from Korea to the West, about all the things going on within their scene. Now, part of that is because they have a hierarchy that is very strictly enforced and controls all the parts below it in the hierarchy. Because they have, if you want to start on the society level, they have the top businesses, the chaebols, these family-run businesses, dynastic companies that are all interconnected. And at the very top, there's only like 5 or 6 of them that control everything. Like the concept of like antitrust laws and monopolies, it almost doesn't exist in Korea. There's like companies that own like all sorts of businesses below themselves, have near monopolies of things, especially like cartel-like arrangements with each other, and then even have companies within that should have obvious conflicts of interest dealing with each other. Like a huge chaebol can own the TV broadcasting studio and a team within the league that plays for the TV broadcasting studio, and the streaming service that does that, and then they're all doing deals with each other within that, and then is involved in the governing body. So you go down to the government below the chaebols, that's obviously influenced by it if you look at the history of Korea, and then you go within esports, we've got a governing body there, we've got KESPA, that's a Korean Esports Association, and they have massive control over everything, and their governing body and their board members are people from the big orgs and from the big TV stations and all these things like that, connected in one, and influence over senators, etc. Then they control the teams and within the leagues and decide where they compete. So in CSGO recently, there was a scenario where some players wanted to leave Tyloo, the number 1 Chinese CSGO team, and so the CSGO team initially kicked a bunch of them out, went to their equivalent of KESPA, and had all these players banned from every league for daring to leave in that particular scenario, and essentially was just going to end their careers. Now, yeah, that in general, that can't really happen in the West as much beyond Riot and League of Legends. I realize it's a different world as well. But this is the way that Asian esports runs. Obviously, difference between China and Korea, but there's some through line in terms of how they expect things to be and what they think they own and control in that particular sense. And as I say, society itself run on a different set of rules. You don't leak things about people who are superior. You don't make moves without checking permission of someone who's involved in it in some way and getting some official stamp on it. People who are above you can abuse their power, can smear you, can speak disparagingly of you, but you can't retaliate in any way back towards them. I've always said this, and I've always thought it was a real shame. When you consider, prior to his Reddit ban, Richard Lewis, the best investigative journalist in esports, was doing lots of stories within League of Legends and was heavily investigating Riot and actually Reddit and other companies that are involved with all this stuff. And I've always thought it was a shame that, unfortunately, because he comes from CSGO and he's never been super duper into Korean side of esports, he's never had that same pull like the rest of us, that Korea's mecca and you've got to go there and get involved in the scene. Because if he'd have ever gotten involved in the scene and he'd have gone and done this sort of investigative journalism in Korea, he would have been like an atom bomb dropped upon them. Like, as in, they're just going on their lives, like in the city of Hiroshima, like, just living their lives, riding bikes, buying flowers, getting groceries, kissing a kid on the cheek, and all of a sudden, in comes the atom bomb, and they're all just dead, and there's fucking shadows burned into the walls, etc. And in an instant, it all changes like that forever. That's what he would have been like if he'd have come in heavily to Korean esports. Because these companies, it's a big no-no that you ever go and leak these things, and that you talk about things without getting permission, and that you dare to go to sources behind the scenes, and that you dare potentially reveal information that could influence business deals within their scene. That doesn't happen. If that happens, they're so controlling of all the Korean companies and journalists that they'll just revoke your press access. Now you can't get into the games. They'll tell the teams, don't talk to this person, actually. We don't want you communicating with them. They'll cut you out that way. So he would have been to them like fucking LSD. He would have just destroyed all boundaries, blown their minds up. And I think actually LSD is a good analogy because the reaction of the controlling forces, the hierarchy, the hegemony of the Korean esports scene would have been like it was to LSD and drugs, like make everything illegal, like repress it all, like the 70s, push it all down again, let's get rid of it all, put them all in jail, they're all traitors, they're all scumbags, send in the agent provocateurs that screw them all up with fake stories and stuff. I think that's what would have happened. So they're lucky that never happened, okay? They're getting away lightly with stories like this coming out in an absolutely totally reasonable manner that have nothing at all that could be that really scandalous. Like it's a fairly reasonable story if you think about it in some senses. But I think it's absolutely disgraceful the way the ROX Tigers behaved. I think they actually owe Jacob Wolf an apology. I think they should shut their fucking mouths in future if they're just lying. Just say no comment. Just do that. Or be tarred as a liar by people like myself who've seen the way you've behaved and that you absolutely have no leg to stand on whatsoever, and that what he said was going to happen, always was going to happen, and in fact did happen overall, and that there's a reason. Put it this way, here's the premise I probably should have said before. When they wanted that team, when they wanted that sponsor that was potentially going to sign with them, that the deal might have got queered by Jacob Wolf revealing this, he's signing thinking he's getting the ROX Tigers. Now, if he'd have signed at that point, and now he comes to see the season 7, like, where's my team? Why the fuck have I got... That's the Afrika Freaks lineup. Exactly. False bill of goods. So the ROX Tigers actually have gotten themselves more wrecked by the way they spoke in that statement than they would have been. In this video itself, this video would never exist. No one would ever have even had to make these points in that particular sense and about the way they control their scene. But they brought it upon themselves, and I hope in future there will be more accountability for organizations that lie and smear the reputation of journalists.